Hi everyone, my name is Callie Cachet and my presentation is on teacher merit pay. Specifically, can merit pay accelerate school improvement? Something that I'm going to be using throughout this presentation is a tool called Pear Deck. It's something that I use almost daily in my classes. I teach 7th grade ELA, and this is a great tool to get students to interact with your Google Slide presentations. So I'd like to invite you to log into Pear Deck from the student side to interact with this presentation while we go through the video. Logging into Pear Deck as a student is simple. There's two ways to log in. You can go to joinpd.com and type in the code that I've provided on my presentation outline, IGBUZW, or you can click the link that I've included in that document. Either way, you're going to get to basically something that looks like a Google slide. You'll be able to click through the slides. You can follow along with me in the video, or you can jump ahead in the slides to see what's coming before I get to that point in my presentation. If you are watching this video on a laptop or computer, you can log into Pear Deck on a phone, or vice versa. You could also open a new tab in your computer and go to joinpd.com and have both tabs open in order to have Pear Deck and the video up at the same time. So you can take a minute to pause this video in order to get logged into Pear Deck, and then we'll jump into the agenda. Okay, hopefully you were able to log into Pear Deck and you're able to see the slides in two different ways, in the video and through the Pear Deck. So here are a few things that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation. To start with our introduction, I'm going to just introduce the topic of merit pay. I'm going to start with a poll, some essential questions, a quick writing activity, and some key definitions to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'll dive into the pros, the arguments for merit pay, and then the cons, arguments against merit pay, ending with some implications for contemporary society, the impact of merit pay on teachers and society today. To begin, what I'd like you to do is, using the Pear Deck, choose an option for your opinion about merit pay. Can merit pay accelerate school improvement? On the Pear Deck, you have some choices: yes, no, and not sure. We'll return to these at the end of the presentation when we also return to our essential questions to see if your opinion has changed in any way. I should mention too that I can see on my side, the teacher-facing side, anyone who logs into the Pear Deck, and I can also see the results from the Pear Deck. So as we dive into a writing activity, just know that your name is attached to it, so you don't have to share anything that's too personal when you are doing those writing activities. Let's look at a couple essential questions that are going to guide this presentation. The first is, what motivates teachers and school administrators to improve school performance? The next, how is school improvement measured? And the third, can teacher evaluations and reward systems be fair? I want you to take a minute to think about that last question, specifically about teacher observations and evaluations. I want you to use the Pear Deck to write your response, or if you're not able to log into the Pear Deck, you can just think about this. You can just pause the video and take a minute to gather your thoughts on these questions. The questions are, what are your classroom observations like? So you as a teacher, who observes you? How often? How is the information shared with you? And do you think your classroom observations would be a fair assessment to determine if you should receive bonus pay? Let's pause the video and take a minute to think about these questions. To give you a little bit of insight without letting out my bias so early in the presentation, I just want to share my personal experience with observations. So my classroom observations are done by my school principal and the assistant principal of teaching and learning in my school. So those are the two people who are allowed to give me an evaluative observation. This happens only once per year because I'm on a 2-year goal cycle. And the information from those teacher evaluations are shared with me through TeachPoint. So it's a digital platform to share the information from the observation with me. Those observations are tied directly to the teacher rubric from DESE, which we'll look at later in this presentation to see if that's a clear indication for receiving bonus pay or not, or a fair assessment for receiving bonus pay. Before we dive into the pros and cons of this argument, I do want to define a few key definitions. The first being merit pay. Another word for merit pay is pay for performance or performance-based pay. It's defined as a raise in pay based on a set of criteria set by the employer. This usually involves the employer conducting a review meeting with the employee to discuss the employee's work performance during a certain period of time. This definition is from the U.S. Department of Labor, but I believe the review meeting with the employee, with the employee's boss, I think that reflects what we as teachers deal with teacher evaluations and observations. Before I talk about that evaluation process, I do want to talk about tenure because I do think it relates in some ways to merit pay, but tenure laws prevent a school district from dismissing a tenured teacher without good reason. This is from the NEA, or the National Education Association. So let's talk about the evaluation process. Teachers can be evaluated using a number of criteria, including administration observations, peer observations, teacher leader observations, student surveys, and student standardized test scores. Merit pay can be and has been based on a combination of these measurements. And lastly, I want to discuss the stakeholders that have a contribution to this conversation. So multiple groups have a stake in the conversation around merit pay, namely teachers, school committees or school boards, and school administrators. One large body that has historically shown concern over merit pay for teachers are teacher unions, represented by the National Education Association, or NEA, since 1857. So let's give a little bit more background before we dive into the pros and cons. Let's talk about why merit pay is even part of the conversation when it comes to salaries for teachers. This comes from the push to improve public education, particularly for impoverished areas, and to hold individual schools more accountable. The history of merit pay goes back to the early 1900s. It was used then, but because of the Great Depression, it prompted consistent pay scales for teachers, and many pilot programs since then have sprung up nationwide, including programs that are happening today. Many problems with merit pay are related to teacher unions, and it's something that teacher unions are bringing up in the conversation. Things like threats to cooperation between teachers, socioeconomic factors that are out of teacher control, and the problem with teacher evaluation not being uniform across the board, and also teacher evaluation becoming costly. So let's dive into some of the pros when it comes to this conversation. Why merit pay could be a good thing. The first is that it encourages and rewards good teachers. The purpose of merit pay is to incentivize good teaching and to keep talented teachers in the classroom and bad teachers away from classrooms. Merit pay comes originally from 1980s and early 2000s, called performance-based compensation, because it helped corporate America's successful restructuring. So it was a system that was helpful in businesses, but something that wasn't necessarily helpful or tried as much in public school districts. Some pilot programs were established in the late 1990s and early 2000s for individual teacher raises. I believe Kate in this class also did a presentation on this topic and did a great job of outlining those programs in particular. One of the problems, as I mentioned earlier, with merit pay is a way of evaluating teachers fairly. So one way that research has found of evaluating teachers fairly is from William Sanders of University of Tennessee. He discovered how to measure a teacher's effect on student performance using complex statistical methods to chart the progress of students against themselves over the course of a school year and measure how much value different teachers added. This resulted in Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, which, according to the Tennessee government website, is still something that's in use. If you click on the Pear Deck link, you'll be able to see a little bit more about that on the website. Occasionally with Pear Deck, these websites will show up as refusing to connect, but if you just click down at the bottom where it says Students Browse and you click the link itself, it should bring you right to that website. So in discussing teacher evaluation, A way for merit pay to be a positive thing for teachers is that it enforces effective teacher evaluation. So teachers are being seen and observed by other people in the building and making sure that they're doing what they should be doing and meeting the standards in order to help the students. So historically, teachers have been rewarded with increased salary with clear steps based on years of experience and level of education. So oftentimes an argument against merit pay is that we should just increase the base pay for all teachers instead of only rewarding those based on seniority and level of education, for example, having a master's degree. And this was tried out in the early 1900s in Chicago, Illinois. Policymakers moved to standardized pay, which included substantial pay differential between male and female employees, even when women started to assume administrative roles. This example wasn't necessarily to increase the base pay, but just to make things more even, but that's not exactly what happened. This is similar in Atlanta, Georgia in the early 1900s. There was a similar pay differential, but the difference was based on race. So even though they aimed to standardize the pay scale, it ended up causing more problems in the long run. Further, even if we're not talking about salary that's based on seniority, if we're talking about salary that's based on levels of education, this compensation motivates employees to get better at their jobs in theory, but the argument may not hold up if teachers are taking courses that are unrelated to teaching and learning. Another pro for merit pay could be group bonus programs, which allow merit pay to help a larger group of people in the school district that are working together rather than being so individualized and only being a raise for one particular person in the school district or only a few different people in the school district. And finally here, I want to discuss a huge benefit to merit pay, which is that it could give better pay for new teachers because the pay scale does not rely solely on seniority. So if you think back to your first year teaching, or some of you might be in your first or second year teaching, you're at the bottom of the pay scale, you're at the bottom of the steps, even though you may be doing more work than many people who are higher up in the pay scale. And that can feel very unfair for teachers who are new to the profession. So this is a quote from Ted Stillwell, director of Iowa's Department of Education in 2001. He says, "The only way for teachers to get paid more under that system, the system of seniority, was for them to stick it out for years." So under the system of merit pay, teachers who are new may be able to be rewarded and have a higher salary than if we keep our current model and only have pay based on seniority. Here's an example of a merit pay program that is happening today. This is in Arkansas, and it was begun last year. It was implemented for the first time last school year. And this merit pay program awarded bonuses to nearly 3,000 teachers with an average bonus of approximately $3,300. The primary goals of the program are to retain high-performing teachers in classrooms across Arkansas and enhance teacher recruitment and retention in priority and critical shortage areas. So to show you a little bit about how this merit program would work, how these teachers are being evaluated, I'm just going to read some of the qualifications that a teacher would need in order to receive this bonus pay. So to qualify in any category, educators had to meet the following minimum requirements. They had to hold a current Arkansas license, be one of the following, which is a classroom teacher who works directly with students for at least 70% of their contracted time, a library media specialist, or a school counselor. They then have to demonstrate positive student growth through one of the following. If they teach a tested subject, so things like math, science, ELA, and civics for us now, for those students or for those teachers, they had to have an average three-year average student growth score of 80 or above, and an annual rating of effective or higher in the educator effectiveness system. For those teachers who are not teaching tested subjects, they have to have an annual rating of highly effective in the educator effectiveness system. Here I attached a teacher rubric for the state of Arkansas, and it's I think in some ways pretty similar to the Massachusetts teacher rubric, but you can take a look at the rubric and see how it matches up, and see if this is something that you feel is an effective way to judge a teacher, and to decide if they should receive merit pay, or if it's not something that you think is fair, and if there's something missing from this. Okay, let's jump into the cons against merit pay. So this is the argument saying that merit pay is not something that's beneficial for schools and for teachers. The first thing from Ramirez from 2001 is that merit pay misconstrues teacher motivation. Much of his research was around motivation and how we can get teachers to improve their school. Ramirez cites Frederick Herzberg's work from 1987 around job motivation, specifically around dissatisfiers and satisfiers. Dissatisfiers included organizational policy and administrative procedures, supervisory practices, employee-employer relations, working conditions, and salary. So salary was not even a motivator. The satisfiers, or the motivators, from this study included achievement on the job, recognition for one's contribution or for a job well done, the work itself, job responsibility, opportunities for career advancement, and professional growth. Ramirez also cites Abraham Maslow's work with Maslow's hierarchy of needs from 1970. He mentions money, benefits, and job security appear at the lower end of the hierarchy, so teachers are more likely to seek those needs elsewhere if they're not being met. In other words, if money, benefits, and job security are not being met in the teaching profession or in a certain school district, they're likely to leave. That being said, I want to introduce this idea of Maslow before Bloom. It's something that is trending when it comes to students, that students need to meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs before they can bloom or reach Bloom's taxonomy or any piece of Bloom's taxonomy. But it can also be applied to teachers in that teachers need to meet their needs from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, before they're able to do this for themselves and for their own students. Remaining on the topic of motivation, Ramirez also cites William Glasser's work from 1997, The Choice Theory, which says intrinsic motivation exists but is tampered when extrinsic motivation is offered. So if teachers are offered bonus pay or merit pay or performance-based pay, they could lose intrinsic motivation that has already been helping them to flourish. He also cites W. Edwards Deming's work from 1993, which says reward systems destroy an intrinsic motivation, self-esteem, and dignity, lead instead to fear, self-defense, and resentment. So finally, extrinsic reward systems create the illusion of employer control when really that control lies in the employer, and it doesn't give any control to the employee. Major argument against merit pay is the fact that school conditions are out of teacher control. So Ramirez says, how can teachers be held accountable for school conditions that they cannot control? Things like the socioeconomic status of their students are things that teachers cannot do anything about in their classroom, and so it can be hard to evaluate teachers on those students and how they interact with them, or how those students score on standardized tests. I'm thinking specifically of an example in my own school where we have a large population, or a larger population than we'd like to have, of chronically absent students. And aside from going to their homes, teachers are, their hands are kind of tied in that they can't do much about a student that is chronically absent, besides encouraging them to come to school. But chronically absent students' performance would affect that teacher's rating scales and their evaluations. Same line of thinking, the question of teacher evaluation is another con for merit pay. Teachers do more than teach content, and the responsibilities often extend beyond the measurable. So if we look at our Massachusetts teacher rubric, it does aim to talk about the social engagement pieces and interacting with the community and interacting with families. But this can be a really difficult thing to measure and to make sure that administrators are actually seeing those things in teachers' classrooms. I also wanted to bring an argument from 2019 from McGee, who writes for Forbes magazine, to bring in this business side of it. So in the business world, bonuses and incentives are based on the clear idea of success. If there's a monetary value to something and a company does well, there's an extra pile of money at the end of the year, and that money can go to employees of that company. But public schools, on the other hand, don't make money, and school district success is really hard to define. So if there is if there are teachers who are going above and beyond, there is no money to offer those because school districts are not a profitable company. So the bonus money is pre-budgeted, then fought over between colleagues, encouraging unhealthy competitive behavior amongst teachers. So in order to have a merit pay program, that money needs to be in the budget well in advance of the school year, and it needs to be approved by others. This goes back to the argument of teacher evaluation. So if only good teachers receive bonuses, how do we decide who are the good ones? Often, historically and currently, the answer is the big standardized test, which unfairly leaves untested subject areas out of the evaluation, or their evaluation is different, like we saw with the case with Arkansas. And because this is a nationwide argument, the big standardized test in Massachusetts refers to MCAS, but in each state, it could be a different set of skills that students are needing to bring to the table. And, that's different for each state that the test is for. McGee also points out that a teacher bonus system is prone to other problems. To fund that pile of bonus money, districts often lower base pay for teachers. So to budget for merit pay or bonus pay, they will actually lower the pay in general. So this actually affects teachers in other ways. Thinking back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, their base pay is the number that's used for mortgages or loan applications and what affects their pension. So it harms teachers in more ways than receiving less money in each paycheck. It does affect their ability to function in society. And I want to end with this quote from educational psychologist David C. Berliner, who says, "The U.S. is saying to its educators that they are not really important. If we thought they were important, we'd pay them a larger share of our gross domestic product as other nations do." Let's go back to the idea of motivation. So I want to show you a quick clip from this TED Talk from Daniel Pink. It's called The Puzzle of Motivation. I'm not going to play it here. You can go to this YouTube link from the Pear Deck. I'll also have it in my presentation outline so that you can click the video from there. But you only need to watch the time-stamped time from 1:46 to 5:04 to see the point that Daniel Pink is trying to make here. So pause this video and go watch that, and then we'll come back together. The point that Daniel Pink is really pointing out here is the fact that intrinsic motivation does exist, and by offering extrinsic motivation, it does not necessarily mean that a task is going to be done better or faster. If we think of this in terms of teachers, if we give teachers all the bonus pay in the world, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be able to do their job any better without adequate resources and other ways of performing that job to the best of their abilities. I also want to discuss another program that has started up recently, which is a merit-based pay program piloted in 2023 in North Carolina. It helps to retain talented teachers and bring in new teachers with more ways to advance in their career and salary, but it has received pushback. So if you go watch this video, it's only about 2 minutes long. If you click the link to bring you to YouTube, or you can click it from my presentation outline, you'll be able to see what people are thinking about this topic today on both sides. So saying that merit pay is going to help teachers, and others explaining that merit pay is not the way to go, and that salaries should be increased across the board. Their base salaries of teachers should be increased. Before we fully wrap up, I do want to talk a little bit more about how this is impacting society today. Let's start with this quote from Peter Green from the Forbes 2019 article. So he says, from a teacher standpoint, judging teacher merit based on test scores, so test scores from the big standardized test, or in the case of Massachusetts, MCAS, is only slightly more reliable than having a horned toad toss dice under a full moon. I think the point here is clear as teachers who teach a tested subject, that it can be difficult to know how a student or a cohort of students is going to perform on that test. And then this other quote from Strauss from 2011 is from Washington Post blog, again against merit pay. And she says, it is curious that teachers vigorously oppose merit pay, even though they are the ones who are supposed to reap the rewards. What do they know? They know that merit pay undermines collaboration and teamwork. They know that it corrupts the culture of the school. And before we fully wrap up, let's go back to the idea of improving teacher salary across the board. So something that was mentioned in the video, the news clip from the North Carolina school districts that are trying out this merit pay option. This is something that you can go to also another website from National Education Association, and I think it's a pretty interesting breakdown of teacher salary. So you can see for Massachusetts, we're currently number 3 in the nation for average teacher salary, which is really great. And we're also number 7 in the nation for starting salary. But if you look at the teacher pay gap, this is measuring what teachers make knowing their education level in comparison to other careers at the same education level. So teachers are making 80 cents to the dollar with compared to people who are working in different professions who have the same level of education. So just food for thought as we continue to wrap up this presentation. Let's do a final quick write just to get you thinking about some of the things we've discussed in this video, specifically thinking about the merit pay program in Arkansas that uses their teacher rubric to assess if a teacher is going to earn bonus pay. So this is an at-a-glance sheet of the classroom teacher rubric that is used for teacher evaluations in Massachusetts. If you teach in another state, I'm sure it's easy to find your teacher rubric, and it could be similar to Massachusetts. But my question for you is this. Is the current classroom teacher rubric for Massachusetts comprehensive enough to be part of an evaluative process for merit pay? And if not, what's actually missing from it? What could be added to it? Is it something that could be observed, or are these things that are more intangible that can't be observed? And if they are intangible, does that mean that teachers should not receive merit pay or bonus pay because they can't be observed? Go ahead and pause this video and let me know your thoughts on this slide. And lastly, let's return to those essential questions that I brought up at the beginning of the video. So the first one being, what motivates teachers and school administrators to improve school performance? So we first need to think about, why do schools need to improve? I think that school leaders need to have a clear goal in mind of what actually needs to be improved. And I think that's something that the North Carolina and Arkansas school are showing with their merit program. Keeping teachers is one of their main goals, teacher retention. The next is, how is school improvement measured? So this is oftentimes linked to test scores. So we should think about what other ways can school improvement be measured if it's not the test scores of students. And finally, can teacher evaluations and reward systems be fair? So that's kind of what I wanted you to think about in that last writing activity. If our teacher rubric is not a fair assessment, what is a way of assessing teachers to evaluate whether or not they should receive bonus pay? Thanks so much for following along with me. You can find my resources that I used for this presentation in my outline. I'll also link the YouTube videos. And if you enjoy using Pear Deck, you can find more information about Pear Deck by clicking this link or just going to peardeck.com. Thank you so much, and I look forward to reading your comments.